Welcome to our latest Book Reporter Talks to interview, where I'm delighted to have Marie Benedict here with us today, where we're going to be talking about her 4 historical fiction novels. Her most recent book is Lady Clementine. Lady Clementine, not Clementine. Bet you all were going to get that wrong. If the name's not familiar, I'm not surprised because I really didn't know who she was either. She's the wife of Winston Churchill. So you can just imagine how rich and exciting this book is going to be. All of these books have been Book Reporter Bets on selections, which is incredibly fun because that means that these are books that I'd recommend that readers read, and I'll be able to share why I think that you like these books and why I think they're going to be something that will make reading special for you and bring you into a different world. So here we are. Welcome, Marie. So happy to have you here.
Thank you. It's been so fun being here. We've known each other for a while.
We've known each other for a while.
Be here together
and be able to be finally talking about these books. So, what drew you to write about Lady Clementine? And I'm so proud that now I know the correct pronunciation.
Exactly.
Because I did promo videos for this book how many times and said Clementine?
You are probably 99.9% of the population.
Okay, all right, now I feel better.
So I find each of my historical women in kind of different places in different ways because I've developed that crazy antenna for them and for their stories. But this one in particular I found when I was actually knee-deep in research for The Only Woman in the Room, which in part is focused on World War II and kind of the rise of World War II from a European perspective. And as I was doing that research and kind of looking at World War II in a slightly different way than what we're taught as Americans, I kept, of course, running into Winston Churchill. You know, the hat, the V for victory, he's everywhere. And if not in person, his handprints are on everything that's going on. And of course, as I always do, I wondered about the women. You know, I knew he had a wife of many, many decades. I didn't know much about her specifically, but I wondered where she was, during all these pivotal moments in modern history. Where was his wife? What was she doing? Was she helping him or was she at home knitting? I had no idea. And so, as I always do, I kind of went down the rabbit hole to find out more about her.
It's so interesting because when the book opens, he's really coming into power. He's really, it's the early days. He's still positioning himself. He's perceived as a leader at that point. But it's still early on. He loves lavish entertaining.
He does.
He loves living life big.
He does.
And it's her job on their minuscule budget
Right.
to be figuring out how to bring in the right champagne,
Right.
how to keep the image going,
Right.
and how to do it. So she starts out really in that role as the wife
Right.
beside him doing that.
Right.
So how did you figure out those little pieces?
Well, what I kind of look back to how it all began for them. They met, they were both from these similar backgrounds, aristocrats, both with mothers that were kind of hands-off, almost neglectful in some ways. And I knew that neither one of them had any money. Despite the fact that he proposed to her at Blenheim Palace, like his family home, I knew that he had very little cash, unlike most of the people who in their social sphere, in their social strata. So, I knew from the beginning that she was going to be facing kind of an uphill battle in terms of, managing the household, managing the governmental space in which they live, managing a staff on this shoestring budget. But what surprised me more than anything actually was that she did that while really serving as his political partner. What I found surprising was the way in which she really hit the ground running in terms of entering and playing a role in his political sphere, even from the very start, even from that very first year that they were married.
Do you know what's interesting to me too is I never thought, I forgot all their money would come from government. It would all come from where they were, where the money was coming from was government all that time. But what I also forgot about is they were still affected by the crash of '29.
Oh, yeah.
All their investment money and everything, the same way as people in this country, hadn't thought about that before.
Well,
I thought about people here, but not there.
Not there. What's interesting about that too is that they didn't come to their world with any trust funds, any money, which again was unusual. Most of the people who filled the kind of high-level governmental positions that Winston did came to those roles with their own money, and the salary they earned was kind of nominal. It was kind of nothing, a throwaway. And here they are trying to, present themselves to the world in these lofty positions with hardly any money, right? So they struggled for years and years. And then finally, Winston came into a small, by their standards, windfall of inheritance. and within a few years lost it all in 1920 in the crash.
Wow.
So, they finally had a little bit of breathing room, felt like they could, in fact, struggle out from the sort of hand to mouth. I don't want to say hand to mouth, but really the shoestring budget.
Being on the wheel, right.
And then it was all gone, and they were back to sort of where they started in terms of their situation. And when he didn't have a lofty governmental position, which was a long time, 1929 to 1939, he supported the family on his writings.
Wow.
So they were very, very unusual duo for their time. They really were.
Yeah, and it wasn't just, this was family money, and this is family, the home
There was no family money.
No, none of that.
Nothing.
Early in the book, they actually weathered this catastrophe of the Dardanelles, which I didn't know anything about. So tell us a little bit about that, because it was really something that had a huge effect on his career way at the beginning.
Oh, yeah, and it really showed to her what she was capable of. So what happened was, in their, as you mentioned, when they married and got together, he was kind of a man on the rise. He was in Parliament, became president of the Board of Trade, then went on to become the Home Secretary, and in 1911 he became Lord Admiral of the Navy. And of course this was a couple of years before World War I. Britain enters World War I in 1914. And from the very beginning, Winston, of course, being Winston, wants to do something different. Instead of attacking Germany from the north, which is how most of the Navy wanted to go about it, he had the idea of attacking via the south through the Dardanelles Strait, which lies between Turkey and the Gallipoli Peninsula. And he wanted to go through there and attack Turkey by land after sailing the Navy through there. And Turkey was one of their enemies at this time. And one of the other reasons he wanted to do it was he wanted to create a supply route to Russia, which was one of their allies. So it had and it would be a surprise, right? Mm-hmm. So he kind of convinces everybody to do this. All the other military leaders say that he has their full support, and he sets out. It is a complete catastrophe. It leads to one of the largest losses of British life in all of military history. So it's an enormous catastrophe. And the reason it failed was not because the plan itself was really faulty. It's because he didn't get the backup naval and army support that he had been promised. But when he returns to England after this, Prime Minister Asquith needs a head to roll, right? There's a coalition. The two party factions have come together to support the government in sort of a unified front, and the Liberal Party has said that they won't continue to do that unless somebody is sacrificed, and Winston is sacrificed for that. And it becomes this huge, not only is he sort of forced into the wilderness, the exiled from politics at this point, and here's a guy who thinks he's like destined from birth to save Britain, right? From all sorts of things. He's exiled from power. His reputation is completely trodden through the dirt. I mean, everybody knows about the catastrophe. They have nowhere to live. They have no money because they live on the salary. And Clementine is faced with a husband who is deeply, deeply depressed. And she doesn't know what to do. So what she decides, she's going to take it upon herself to see if there's any way she can do what she can to restore him to power. And she basically lunches, dines, has drinks with, sends letters to everybody in her sphere. And she learns that the only way he's going to restore his reputation is to actually go to the front. Now, let me tell you how unusual that was. Women of his stature didn't go off to the front and fight. They didn't fight in the trenches. They led battalions, right? They didn't actually get their hands too dirty, except in the way of strategy. But he knew he had to do it, and she had to swallow her worries and her concerns and send him out. And he wrote to her repeatedly during this time, I think it's time for me to come home. And she'd be like, no, not yet. Your reputation's not restored yet. And he'd send her around buying all sorts of things for him to make his life in the trenches more pleasant. And during this time, she's rolling up her sleeves and helping. She's creating mobile canteens for the factory workers. She's starting campaigns for housewives to make gas masks and things for the front because she doesn't want him to be the only one making sacrifices. And her endeavor is successful because by 1916, 6 months after he goes to the front, he's returned and he starts the process of being restored to power. And within a year, he's the Minister of Munitions. So,
wow.
Really is all due to her, because if it had been left to his devices, that is not what would have
No,
happened.
it was not what would have happened at all. And it's interesting because in so many ways they were different because their politics were different. She was more socially liberal-minded. He went back and forth. He kind of vacillated on what happened.
But when they first met, they were
like-minded, right.
And I really think that one of the things that knitted them together from the start was, of course, their passion for politics, but also they were really unusual in their class in that they were both liberals. And the Liberal Party at that time really supported humanitarian efforts and supported women. And they really came together on that. And for many years, up until the 1920s, they shared both that passion for politics and the same viewpoint. And things did become harder for her when he switched back to being a conservative in the 1920s. It really wasn't until they both unified in their sort of fight behind the scenes against Germany in the 1930s that they really came together fully again.
Fully in, yeah. Because I just found that was so interesting because I hadn't given much thought that they were not on the same party lines the entire time. I thought that was something where they, you know, sort of united them the whole time. Someone notes in the 30s that Hitler is energizing the German people after their loss in the war, which is, they come over and they said to him, this is what he's energizing the people and making them feel better about themselves. Now, we of course know this from another perspective. So as you're writing, did you find you had to forget what you know as you were writing? And you live in that moment?
You have to, I mean, you have to pretend that you don't realize the outcome, right? Because you know, during this time period, the 1930s, Winston is once again exiled from power, right, for a variety of other reasons. But one of the things that really makes him, you know, stuck in the wilderness is the fact that he keeps on sounding the gong that Germany and the Nazis are rising up and they're going to try and breach the Treaty of Versailles. And they're going to start another war. And nobody wants to hear this. Everyone is saying exactly what you're quoting. Prime Minister Chamberlain, the rest of the British government. Oh, you know, what? He's just energizing those people. It's okay.
They were so sad after losing the war. Let's just make everyone feel better.
And what we don't want is to antagonize them, right? So they entered into this long history of appeasement of Hitler and all of his various machinations. In part because they didn't think the people of Britain had an appetite for war. They didn't think that they had an appetite for bloodshed or, you know, all the sort of financial and physical downfalls that come from that. But in part, they just didn't want to really cross Hitler again. And Winston was sounding that gong, saying, hey, listen, people, this is what's going to happen. And it's hard as you're writing to not look at what he's saying and look at the British government and the really the majority of the people and say, how can you not see this? How can you not see that he's right? And of course, with the benefit of hindsight, we know that everything he was predicting came to pass.
Yeah, and you were just sitting there saying, wait, I have to take myself back in knowledge. I have to go back and sit like I'm sitting in Britain at those years and say, well, I'm seeing the same things that other people are seeing, and then see his ideas on things. And I always do this thought process of, what would I have done? I always sit there and say, would I have been that clairvoyant, or would I have just had my head in the sand as well? And it's always, when you're reading these books, you're always trying to figure out what would have happened.
Well, I do think that I'm not a Winston Churchill expert by any stretch, but certainly one of his gifts was to kind of telegraph into the future and see, not that he was, you know, had some sort of special skills, but he had the ability to amass great swaths of information and kind of see the patterns evolve, and he could see what was happening. And that's really where he and Clementine really became realigned in the mid to late 1930s, sort of after this period of falling out and difficulties between them. She kind of looked at where they were in their lives and their marriage, right? He was exiled from power, depressed again, and they weren't aligned in terms of their politics, but where they were in unison, where they were alike, was that they felt they wanted to do the best thing for the British people, and she could see what he could see about Germany. And so they basically, in the mid to late 1930s, turned Chartwell, their country home, into really an outpost of anti-appeasement activity. They were gathering information, watching what Hitler was doing, getting sort of confidential information, espionage type stuff, and amassing a case against Hitler for when the time came that people could actually listen. And that really is what unified them and readied both of them for World War II.
Yeah, and then as they get into World War II, she is immediately, while he's looking at what's happening on the front, she is taking to heart what's happening to the people at home.
That's right.
And when you look at what she did in her work with the air raid shelters, and how she's going in and saying, these people are living in these places. And you know, I thought you went in at dark and you left at dawn, and I didn't realize people were there a lot longer than that. And they could not go back. And you know, I remember seeing a picture once of the apartment house that was completely sheathed, like the outside, and you could just look into every apartment by what had happened. But I think that she really brought to light of this is something that's ongoing. It's
Right.
like our version of homelessness.
Exactly.
And we're going to have to do something about it.
And what that is such a perfect example of really her mission, right? You know, she always served, no matter whether we're in World War I or World War II, whether we're in the years in between, she's serving as a political partner for Winston in all of his endeavors, you know, working on his speeches, helping him with policies, working on him with staff. But once we reach World War II, she's really built up a lot of experience, skills, and confidence. And she's not going to wait for anybody to invite her into history, right? And so what's concerning her are the things that have always concerned her. The people, right? The women. And so when she's looking around, she sees that most of the government is focused on the war, but the people of England are suffering, and so many things are being left under addressed that really are important, and she sets to the task of handling those things. And one of them is the air raid shelters. Most people kind of thought of them as something that you could just pop up, this whole blitz thing will be over in a flash. But meanwhile, the people were living there 10 to 14 hours a day, sometimes full time.
Sometimes full time,
if
yeah.
their houses were gone.
Right.
And it was ongoing for months and months and months. And she walked into these, you know, there's no sanitary conditions, no toilets, no beds. These people are living in appalling conditions.
It's dripping water. The walls are dripping water, right?
She can see outbreak of disease, and she's thinking about them at a time when most people didn't have the bandwidth, for lack of a better word, to do that.
Really. And then at the same time, we all know that they were trying to get America to enter the war and what they were doing. But I think that this is the first book, then, I'm sure there have been other books, but I'm going in through your lens and through her lens on it, about trying to move Roosevelt towards war and what people were doing to try to move him there. Their names I knew, like Averell Harriman. Like I knew these names, but I did not really connect that that's what they were doing at those points. And she's entertaining them.
Right.
And I thought those passages were so interesting about what she was doing to try to show them this is what's going on in the country in the best possible light and woo them into the war.
I mean, it was really a concerted effort, a campaign that she and Winston undertook to woo the Americans. I mean, they knew they were the last country standing, and they knew that they didn't have the resources to last that much longer. They could see that FDR was still very much in a hands-off position. You know, his views in some ways weren't that different from Chamberlain's. You know, we don't have the appetite for war. That's your fight. That's not our fight. But they knew that they needed to get them involved somehow, or they weren't gonna last.
They weren't gonna last, yeah.
And so the two of them really sat together and thought, what can we do? And that's where this sort of campaign to woo the Americans began. I mean, Clementine became close personal friends with Harry Hopkins, Averell Harriman, Gail Winnett, all these sort of right-hand people to FDR to woo them, show them what the British people were suffering, show them how much they had already endured, how critical their work was and their mission, and how the Americans should really, if they weren't going to step in to fight, they should at least step in to help. And Clementine was critical in that undertaking.
Yeah, and you saw she would pick the exact place. This is where we're going to go do this. This is where we're going to go do that to make sure it showed. And it was, I also found it interesting because I always knew Pamela Harriman, like I knew that name, but I never realized that it was actually her son's. What was his name?
Randolph.
Randolph's.
It was her husband.
It was Randolph's husband. Her oldest son was Randolph. It was Randolph's wife was Pamela.
Right.
They had gotten divorced because he was a completely playboy, and she was just not going to put up with any of that anymore. And then she ends up falling for Averell Harriman and ends up marrying him. And
But not for many decades.
But not for a long time.
Right.
I went and looked that up.
Right. So it's interesting, you know, she was only 19 when they married. He was basically looking around town for a partner because he was going to war. He asked many people before he actually landed on Pamela.
Yeah.
Because he was
a lot of people did not want to marry Randolph.
No, Randolph was not a good guy. And they end up marrying, and he continues in his usual ways. And, you know, she and Averell start an affair during World War II. And Clementine and it was a big bone of contention between Randolph and Clementine and Winston because they knew what was happening. And while they didn't approve of it, they weren't going to do anything about it.
Well, they also knew their son had been, like, not a great guy.
Number one. But number two, they also knew how important it was. Because Pamela was feeding them information, feeding the British information, and she was helping woo Averell. So, you know, it was an interesting exchange, probably an interesting time for their family, and it really did put a wedge between them for a long while, even though he wasn't exactly a stand-up guy.
No, not completely a stand-up guy at all. But I remember today I was just doing some research, and I was like, wait, when did she marry?
Not for decades.
Not for decades. And she died in, I think it was 1967. And I said, this is just, it was just a very, very interesting
But it
time.
all began back then.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Clementine also spent a lot of time smoothing the waters that Churchill would rough up.
Yeah.
I mean, he would just walk out and the waves would be here and she would just sit there and calm everything down. It was very, very interesting to see and watch how she did that. Did you do it when you were doing research? Could you just like see this is what happened this day and this is how she fixed it?
So yeah, in terms of Clementine smoothing the waters for Winston, you can see it in their letters, and there's lots of incredible accounts of things that happened and the way she kind of went through and smoothed them. Like one example, of course, is when World War II began and they were at number 10 Downing Street, he was just like a hurricane through the staff quarters. And, you know, Clementine would go after, have tea one by one with each of the staff members, let them know that they were valued and that their work was important. But then she wasn't afraid to take a stand with him. And in fact, during that time period, she wrote him a scathing letter, which is wonderful to read today, just talking about how you can't treat people like that. These people are necessary, they're important, they look up to you, and you need to treat them with respect. And by all accounts, his behavior changed after that. Now, that doesn't mean there weren't the occasional kind of kerfluffle, but for the most part, the kind of day in, day out berating, belittling of staff started to kind of smooth over.
At the same time, his avant-garde ways, many people had to adjust to her because of the way she was and the way she behaved, and they weren't used to it. And I really love the part where Jacques Colville, this trusted private secretary, is overheard talking about her, and she hears them talking about somebody, and she doesn't realize it's her.
Right.
And then how much they say she's like, usurping power and all this kind of stuff. And then she realizes she needs to actually confront him.
Right.
And she needs to sit there and say, this is the way things are going to be. Either you're with me or they're like me or the highway, you know?
That's right. And that is based on, I mean, I had to fictionalize part of that exchange, but that's based on accounts from his memoirs that, he was resisting the fact that, let me back up a second. So in Great Britain, the prime minister's wife doesn't have an official role. Like we have a first lady. So she doesn't have official responsibilities. And she doesn't have official duties, right? So what that meant in Clementine's situation, up until her, most of the political wives really didn't have any interest in those sorts of things. So in many ways, she used that lack of duty and responsibility, which also translates to lack of a barrier, to create a fashion role that was entirely her own. And she sort of cobbled together her own, rose up and really cobbled together her own power base. She was in meetings, she was going to be consulted, she was going to have opinions, and a lot of people didn't like that. And Jacques Colville was certainly one of them, although he was not the only one. And she knew that if she backed down, that was going to be the end of the power that she had assembled for herself. So she took him to task, and she knew that she was going to have to do that, and she had to do it over and over again.
It's almost like she realizes her life mirrors many other women who jump in with 2 feet and then find out they're marginalized.
That's right.
And I thought that was such a great way of putting, like, this is what ends up happening, is if you just do this, then if you don't do it, you're just going to be marginalized from here on out.
That's right. She saw what happened, let's just take World War I, for example. For the first time, women were really invited into positions other than working at home, right? And they were invited into the workforce in a minimal way, of course. And then as soon as the war was over, it was back. And once, when she never had that situation because she always had the avenue of power through Winston, right? She didn't love that she had to derive it exclusively from him, but she knew that she was in a much different situation than most women. And when World War I came about, she wanted to give women even more opportunity. She didn't want them to just fall back into marginalization again. She wanted to open the doorway for them to try things that were much more ambitious than what they had been before. And then hopefully that would lead to a pathway to even less marginalization, more success.
And there are just some things that women also, she was saying, that they can do that a man can't do.
Yeah.
There were certain things that she could get away with in the room. And there's a moment where she's talking to de Gaulle.
Yeah.
And she's speaking with de Gaulle. And she can say something.
Right.
And sort of get away with it because she's a woman.
That's right.
And as a result, she could say it. And he would maybe listen, maybe dismiss. But if he was a man, she never could have said what she said. Because it would be considered too impertinent or something like that.
Right. I think in that, what's interesting about that situation, she actually, it was in the late 1940s. England was standing alone. France had fallen. And de Gaulle, Charles de Gaulle, was one of their generals who had kind of defected to England and said that he was going to try and help the Free French. But right when that happened, when the Nazis had taken over the French fleet, Winston basically was faced with a horrible dilemma of having to actually torpedo the French fleet, the big chunk of it, because they had fallen into enemy hands. But of course, he also had to shoot and kill all these sailors and military people, and it was a really tough decision for him. He knew he didn't have a choice, and de Gaulle was not happy with that, which you can understand as well. But he was really berating and belittling Winston for it, and Clementine wasn't going to let him get away with that. You know, she looked at Winston and she kept on expecting him to rise up and say, "Hey, wait a second. I understand how you feel, but like she said, don't let your friends become your enemies, right? We're your friends in this situation." And always in situations where he wouldn't take that next step and make the hard statement or make the tough decision, she would make it for him. And in D-Day, that's another situation similar to that. Winston had always resisted the kind of plan that they had that was involved in D-Day. He knew it was going to be a huge loss of life. Did not welcome it, but finally he knew he was put in a position where it had to go forward. But even the night before D-Day, I wouldn't say he was waffling, but he was really lamenting it, really second-guessing himself, very conflicted. And Clementine, once again, kind of had to hold his feet to the fire. You know, he could go only so far in certain situations, and sometimes she had to be the one to say that last thing, to hold him accountable for a particular decision, or make him really own up to that very hard choice. So she really, in many ways, was almost like his ultimate fortitude, his ultimate courage.
Yeah, what's going on. Yet when he goes to Washington to meet, and he goes and he's meeting with Roosevelt, he actually is diminishing what she does. And she finds out about this. And he is just talking about her as sort of like the little woman, you know, well, which was just so interesting. But the feedback she gets on that, she is immediately incensed and goes after him about it. It's just like, why did you do that? You know?
So when he's in visiting Washington, D.C. for the first time, and he's at a meal with both FDR and Eleanor, he says basically that she prefers to stay at home and not do anything, which of course is the exact opposite of what she does. And she of course finds out about it. Eleanor tells her. And she's furious with him, yells at him, and he says, "Oh, I just didn't want her to get too big of britches." He kind of explains it as a reaction to her. But she lets him have it, and he knows that he will not do that again. And she doesn't want anyone to minimize. While she's not going to proclaim her contributions, she knows that the public at large will not accept that. At no point does she want him to diminish what she's done.
And at the same time, so she and Eleanor Roosevelt meet. Eleanor Roosevelt comes over to England, and she says, "I'm going to show you the country, and I'm going to show you," and she thinks she's going to museums. And she says, "No, I'm going to take you into the air raid shelters," which is exactly what Eleanor Roosevelt wants to do. Those two, how similar were they?
They were similar in a lot of ways and very different in others. I mean, they were similar in that they were both very bright women married to these incredibly bright, powerful, ambitious political leaders, right? And of course, nobody could understand their situation really than the other, right? They were each married to who were the two most powerful men in the world at that time. And so they could relate a lot in that way. And they both kind of they had similar backgrounds. You know, they were both educated in England. They both had mothers that were less than nurturing. They both had to bring themselves up by their own bootstraps, very bright women. But they were different in the way that they kind of interacted with the world and that they interacted with their spouses. You know, Clementine, for all her sort of ability to give powerful speeches, she was actually quite a reticent and shy person. And so she found that kind of one-on-one banter with the press very challenging. Eleanor could do that, and she could give a speech, and she could work a room. She was more approachable, more accessible than Clementine was. I think, too, Clementine was more guarded than Eleanor was. But one of the things I think that's most interesting about their relationship is, you know, they did develop a rapport, and they did really learn from each other. But in many ways, I think that Clementine we always think about Eleanor Roosevelt as being an example of a powerful woman in her time. But in many ways, I think Clementine was more powerful than Eleanor. Even though she's little known, behind the scenes, she was truly her husband's political partner and confidant. There was no area of the political machinations or developments that were happening that she didn't either know about or didn't have an opinion about. She knew more. It said that she knew more than even the cabinet did. Wow. So she had full access, including things about the war. Eleanor had her own kind of fiefdom. It was the domestic sphere. Once the war started to rise up, FDR completely cut her out of that. So she had a sphere in which she did have her own a distinct power, but what the sort of primary things that were happening in the world at that time, she was really distant from and didn't have that access.
There was one point where you mentioned or you wrote where she was someplace, well, she was like exiled to like Hawaii or something like that. She was someplace when a lot was happening on this part of the world and he didn't want any part of her being there. She was sent someplace else.
The nature of FDR and Eleanor's relationship was very different than the nature of Winston and Clementine's relationship. And as a result, because certainly in Clementine's case, to some extent in Eleanor's case, their power derived from their husbands because that was the nature of the times, Clementine's power was greater than Eleanor's was.
Again and again, Clementine laments the lack of time she spends with her children.
Yes.
And she definitely has issues with this. And there's a point where Randolph, her oldest son, says, your whole existence focuses on him and his requirements. He demands all of you, and there's no space for your children to have needs. Do you think she was conflicted about her role as a mother?
Oh, absolutely. But I don't think she was going to let it stop her from
doing
being
what she did,
Winston's political partner. I mean, I think she, children were, they were just going to happen. I mean, that was like not a choice, right? Women had children. And I think women of her time period, especially aristocratic women, weren't expected to actually hands-on parent, right? They had nannies, they had governesses. They weren't expected to do the day-to-day stuff. They were managing, right? So that's sort of what her expectations were for parenting. But because of the nature of the relationship she had with Winston as really his full political partner, he was really her primary focus, not the children. And in fact, Mary Soames, the youngest and best adjusted child, was quoted later in life as saying, Daddy always came first, second, and third for Mommy. And that was, but for her, that was okay because her parents were doing the good work of the nation, and she had somebody who loved her, who was a family member to care for her. The older three children, because of their financial situation, had a rotating series of nannies, each one more inexperienced and cheaper than the next.
Yep.
And that led to some very spotty, inconsistent parenting, and in many ways led to Marigold's death.
That's exactly. And it's like,
and that was hard.
and I think that's hard for Randolph to have sat and watched. Was it, not that she was abused, but she was, there was not that care going on for her.
No.
That when she was ill, it became that big a situation.
Yeah.
And they missed it. Whereas when Mary came along, she realized she needed somebody from the family to come and help her.
To be a consistent, loving child care provider. And I think that was really the upshot of Marigold's death, was both Winston and Clementine, I mean, it struck them both horribly. I mean, Clementine suffered from the loss and the guilt the rest of her life. Winston less the guilt, but the loss. And I think in response, they both had another child very quickly, but Winston was determined and did, on the day of Mary's birth, bought Chartwell. I think he wanted to have a country home that was almost like a fortress for his family. If he could just build this perfect country home and put his family there, then nothing bad would ever happen again. And for Clementine, she knew she couldn't be the wife to Winston that he demanded, and the kind of parent that she could now see her children needed. So she was determined that her children wouldn't have these sort of raggedy nannies and governesses anymore, so she was going to hire a family member, and that person became the long-term, loving child care provider. And it wasn't too late for Mary, but it really was too late for the
other children.
three.
And it was also because she was so young when they married
Yeah.
that you wouldn't have a mature family person because everybody was your age or
That's
younger.
right.
It's not
Yeah.
like you could sit there and find somebody who was older or old enough to be able to manage the children.
That's right.
There were also nods to mental illness, the depression that would overcome Churchill in his life, and her anxiety. And in fact, she goes away for a while. She,
Several times.
Several times she has a breakdown and, goes away. Later, she went to the East Indies on a 4-month trip that she was conflicted about taking, but she knew she needed downtime from Winston.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting that she leaves right before Christmas.
Which is her special holiday.
Which I
Right?
found that fascinating. That was like, would I wrap the presents and leave?
Right. It's interesting, in choosing to write about these women, right? I try to present them as real people, as they, in many ways, I hope they really were, even though it is fiction. And that means depicting them with flaws, and I think one of the things that's especially hard from a modern perspective, where we have a very different take on parenting, it's hard sometimes to look at the way Clementine made parenting choices. And I try, like we talked about earlier, to put myself in the back in the time period, but even then she made some choices that were really kind of out there even for the
They're
time
really
period.
avant-garde for that time.
Yeah, they really were.
You think about where even the 50s were here in this country. Afterwards,
right.
there was nothing progressive going on until the 60s. You know,
And she made some interesting choices, and I think actually that's one of, from what I understand, one of the more controversial sort of aspects about the book is the way in which she parented her children.
Yeah, and it was very clear where her own interest in power lied as well.
That's
Besides being the spouse to him, she had power dreams at the same time.
Absolutely. And if she were born in a different era, if she were born in our era, she may never have married and had children. She may just have been a politician in her own right.
That's exactly.
And I really think that it was a function of the time in which she lived and the restraints that were put on women, sort of the conscripted roles into which they were slotted, that really forced her to kind of have this kind of life that she had.
The closing line of the book, and I'm going to read this because I'll never be able to remember. When the successors of our time appraise Winston and this awful war, and surely they must, I know they will see Winston's pen, hand on the pen that scribes history, but I wonder if they will see that it was my hand on the pen all along. Yeah. What a great wrap of the book. I just read that line and was like, whoa.
Thank you.
Did you know that was the last line from the beginning? Did that come in?
Honestly, like I mean, there are different points in the book when her hand is on the pen. You know, on their wedding day, I have her hand. Like, am I going to be able to get my hand on the pen? Am I going to? But I wanted people to, because one of the things that I take away from this book, especially when I give talks about it, is, you know, we have emblazoned on our subconscious or conscious all these images of Winston Churchill, right? All these iconic images of these key events in modern history, right? If we just widen the lens a little bit, she's very often standing right there. And if she's not physically standing there, she has done so much to make that moment happen. She should be in the lens. So, you know, just kind of taking that metaphor and using it a little bit differently, it's the hand on the pen. Like, we don't recognize the fact that, you know, we know so much about him. He's so iconic to us, and we attribute so much of, you know, the success of World War II, the freedom that derived from that. We attribute that to him. But when I think about World War II, I cannot imagine it without Clementine.
Right, and what she did.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes, on the front lines, what she was doing and moving things around.
And would he have been able to prevail and do the things that, I mean, never mind if you agree or disagree that she had a role to play in politics and staff matters and strategy, but even if we put that aside, it's undeniable that she had a huge role in both the emotional and physical upkeep of Winston Churchill. Could he have survived and thrived enough to fulfill the role that he had to play during World War II without her? I definitely don't think so.
And without just a condescending wife, it wouldn't have been quite the same way as well.
No.
Would have fed the ego too much. So what do you find most challenging about researching these historical women? Because I would think, you know, you're down the holes in some part of history, but you have to make the storytelling seamless. Like, you're doing both.
Picking and choosing.
Picking and
choosing.
choosing.
Picking
throw
and
a lot
choosing.
out?
Yeah, I'd have to. You know, I mean, especially with this book, which was probably in terms of the breadth of the research, the most challenging to write. There are sometimes I have to skip ahead years, if not a decade, to a point in time where I think the story really reaches another level. And that's hard because, you know, there's so many things that she did that I want to highlight. There's so many accomplishments that she made, things that she was involved in that I want to shine the light on, but I have to pick and choose the ones that are going to work. And that in some ways is the hardest. You know, the other thing I would have to say besides that is probably the research. It's not always there. I mean, we just learned today that there's a whole bookstore of just Winston Churchill stuff here in New York City. Wow. But there's only like 3 or 4 books about Clementine.
Wow.
You know?
Wow. So where's the store?
I think it's in the 50s, right?
Okay.
Didn't we learn that? It's in the 50s?
50s.
In the city. So there's this whole book. I mean, there's been thousands of books written about him, but she played a huge role too. So, you know, the other limitation in writing these kind of books is the research that's available to you. And, you know, and that's why I really feel like fiction is the best way you can tell a full story, because you are going to run into limitations in the research, but once you know the woman and you know their character, you can make really logical extrapolations about what they did during that time period that a biographer wouldn't be able to do.
And you've said you can't read a history book, examine a historical artifact, stroll through a museum, or even read a newspaper like you did before.
I can't.
Because you just sit there and you see this whole backstory.
Where are the women? I mean, that's what led me to Clementine. You know, I keep on seeing Winston, but where is she? And once I went down that rabbit hole and I saw what she had done, it was much more than I could have ever imagined or fictionalized.
Yeah, I knew nothing going in.
Nobody
Knew
does.
absolutely nothing, including pronunciation of her name. And I also have these details, like 6 toothbrushes laid in a row and used in strict rotation.
Yeah.
I mean, there are those little bites that just make the book, you picture the toothbrushes all lined up, used in strict rotation.
Yeah.
But that was one of his things.
It was one of his things. Yeah, I mean, it's those things that to me bring them to life. You know, it's looking at, you know, the details of how she had to manage his daily schedule to maintain equilibrium at home in Chartwell when he was in the wilderness, right? It's the details of what she wore during World War II to kind of telegraph to the people her solidarity with them, that special headscarf and the crazy vibrant coats.
Right.
Like, I loved learning those things.
They're tying it just the right way so that she looked like the people.
Factory workers,
exactly.
The female factory workers wear their hair. When I first started seeing those pictures of her, I was like, what is she got on her head? But really, it was very important. It was very symbolic and emblematic for her. So, you know, when you look, and that's really the way in which I research, is to kind of cast my net wide to get all the big picture trends, the developments, and then to kind of get into the micro part of the world, because that's where we live. You know, we live in the details. We live in your turquoise crayons and your eggplant cardigan. You know, we live in those details, but there's also larger things kind of spinning around us. The challenge with this book is the larger things were their daily things.
Right.
For the other women I've written about, the larger events, the cultural, political, governmental things that are happening around them affect their world, but they're not their entire world.
Yeah.
And that is what it was for
These
them.
are moments of touching on different things. And, well, I want to get into those other books in one second, but I have to ask you what Bezique, with a game.
Oh, Bezique. I have no idea how to play it.
You don't know how to play it? Okay.
No, do you?
No, I have no
I just
idea
know
what it
that
is.
that's
Is it
how
a card
they play
game?
it. It's cards, yeah.
It's cards. I feel like somewhere along the way we have to get together and play this, because I think it came up in The Only Woman in the Room, too.
Did it? Yeah, it's very popular. It's all during the same time period.
And it was really funny because I saw it then and I was like, what is this card game? So I feel like I need to research this more, you know, blah, blah, blah.
Play it.
Yeah. So this historical fiction, thus there's room for license. Do you ever wonder how far you can go with
Yes, oh, definitely.
And you censor yourself a lot?
I do, and sometimes I take things out that I have seen in research, because I feel like they may not further the story, or that they might be too much. Yes, I do, because I feel a humongous sense of responsibility to these women. You know, I feel like they did not get the recognition that they deserved during their lifetimes, and I feel like it's my job to give them that recognition, get them a second chance at historical recognition. So I want to make sure I do it in as respectful a way as I can, and as truthful and fulsome a way as I can. And so I really do try to make careful choices.
Are their family members still alive?
Oh yeah, here?
Yeah.
So we do know some family members have received this one.
Okay.
Actually, 2 of their grandchildren have, and I actually got a lovely email from Diana's daughter about the book, which was really sweet.
Oh, how lovely.
And that is something that's always in the back of my mind, not for this, but for the rest of the people. There are family members still alive, and you know, I hope that they see these women as I do, and see my work as I do, which is, I believe these women they're my heroes.
Yeah. Alison Pataki and I were talking a couple of weeks ago. She'd written the Queen's Fortune, and it was about it was just, and we were talking about the people, the ancestors are still alive, and the descendants are still alive in Sweden, and I thought it must be so interesting to pick up a book and say, wait a second, this is about people I actually know. These are people that my family members that I actually knew,
right? And
now it's a moment of history too.
Well, and I think about that as I write, like how would they feel about this? How would they? And I don't censor myself and like taking out things that I think are necessary for the story, but I do try to, you know, imagine how they might react to it. Because
the honor.
I mean, the parenting is challenging in here. I mean, it's not always flattering, the choices that she made, but it was very much a part of who she was. It was a product of her upbringing, you know, which was very. There's a lot of neglect that happened there, a lot of difficulties in her upbringing, and a product of her time. So I do have a lot of empathy and compassion for these women, but I'm not sparing.
No, so sparing of what was going on. So each of your other books Let's see. Let me see if I can do this. This is Einstein's wife, okay? And she, Mitza Emmerich, she's a brilliant physicist in her own right. We've got historical fiction, Carnegie's Maid, about Clara Kelly, who was a lady's maid in the home of prominent businessman Andrew Carnegie, and really helped him with influenced his transformation into being more of a philanthropist. And then we have The Only Woman in a Room, which was about, remind me her name?
Hedy Lamarr.
Hedy Lamarr.
Yeah.
Hedy Lamarr, who we all know as an actress, but also an inventor.
An inventor, yeah.
And the person in the room that everybody thought was beautiful and talked in front of and gave away all the state secrets.
Exactly,
It was great.
yeah.
Absolutely great. So 4 very, very different characters. These are all stories beside the men. These are all stories about women.
She wasn't beside a man.
That's right. That's right.
She
wasn't.
wasn't.
Well,
And
she
neither
was.
was
She was beside
Well, her first husband.
her first
yeah.
husband. She was
That's
beside
true.
her first
She had to
husband.
escape him.
She had to escape her first husband,
Yeah,
and her
that's
first
true.
husband, and when she was beside him, he was ignoring her
Right.
as being anybody. So I saw her as beside in a different way.
Yeah, exactly.
And this in Carnegie's Maid, she was not married to him, but she was an influence to him.
That's true.
So in each of
That's
them, bring these women out of the shadows. Has it become a passion of yours at this point?
Oh my gosh, that's my mission.
That's
you
your
know,
mission?
to bring these women out from the past and bring them out into modern day where we can really see the breadth of their contributions and see these modern issues that they struggle with. Absolutely.
So Clementine, closest to your heart? Both were?
Oh gosh, it's like saying which of my sons is my favorite.
Well, I'm
can't
trying to
do
figure out
that.
like which of the one. Okay, let me rephrase that. Which of the one that you've written about do you miss the most?
I wouldn't say that I miss any of them specifically. I feel the most protective of Mileva and the other Einstein because I think she was the most vulnerable.
Okay,
And
I can
she
see
had
that.
tremendous potential, and that was really taken from her. So I
She was not even beside; she was beneath. You know,
she
it was
beneath. I mean,
yeah.
she was in front of, really.
Right.
She really
Yeah.
was. So she was the most vulnerable of all the women I've written about. So I feel probably the most tender about her, I would say. But I do love them all.
Yeah. So all of them, I know.
I do. I love them all.
So do you speak with book groups?
Oh, I do all the time. Yeah.
And have you learned anything from your book groups?
I learn
remember,
stuff all the time.
and because they I'm sure, do their own research. Like
They
after they
do.
finish reading the
And
books,
they
like me,
challenge
looking
me.
out.
I mean, to me, that's one of the most rewarding parts of it to see. You know, writing is such an isolated business, and so to actually have to be in the presence of readers and see how the book spoke to them, answer their questions, that's really important for me. And sometimes, you know, they're shedding light on the story that I didn't see because it speaks to them. It touches them in a particular way.
Well, I can see if it's an older group of readers, they're lived through World War II.
Yeah.
If it's a younger group of readers, they're coming to learn about it in a different way. And it's interesting because a lot of people are saying they're tired of World War II books, but I found like this book shed a completely different perspective.
Oh,
I
thank
felt
you.
like I was thinking about it because I wasn't in Germany, I was in Britain.
Right.
I was completely in a different part of the war, I was in the power part of the war, whereas a
Right.
lot of times it's the people who are being persecuted that we're
That's
reading
right.
about instead of the people that are in power. And most of the books that have come out over the last years
True.
are about the people who survived the camps or were
Right.
in hiding or they were telling stories. This is somebody who is in power. So this book read in tandem with the others gives a completely different perspective
that's
on what's
really
going on,
interesting.
which I hadn't. I thought about it after I finished, and I was like, what was different? Because basically anything about World War II right now, I'm not jumping on the train to go sit and
You're
read.
done. You're done.
Yeah,
You're a little
I
bit
feel like
done.
I've read a lot, and I feel
Yeah.
like I've heard a lot of these stories. And then I realized this was a lot about the same times. I also realized that if history was taught like this, I told Allison the same thing a couple weeks ago, I would have paid a lot more attention.
Oh, me too.
Because it was like, a lot more interesting because history was taught, you know, school. I have problems with the way school is taught these days
Yeah.
too. We're taught battles, we're taught this, we're taught that, but we're not taught the feelings and the
Right.
emotions that you walk away with. Whereas a lot of life these days is about emotion and how people feel and
Absolutely.
whatever.
I mean, history
And that's-
is really an individual's story that happens to take place in a particular time period, and how the developments that happen affect them specifically. So it really is best approached from the individual rather than, but that's not how it has traditionally been taught. And
No.
that's, you know, I feel like going back and seeing it through other people's eyes, seeing World War II through British eyes or Austrian eyes. I mean, how often do we look at Austria in World
No,
War II?
not thinking
very
about it at all.
infrequently. I think it gives you a very different perspective.
Yeah, and you're putting all the books together. It's almost like I'd like to put together a curriculum, a high school curriculum, of which historical fiction would you read?
Oh, I
to
love that.
do to
Yeah.
have a 360 view, and I think you probably get the kids more interested
Oh,
in coming away and
definitely.
having learned more about not just this bill. I mean, I just remember all the things we memorized and all the things we learned, and I don't think
And
it's
then
changed.
forgotten. No.
And I really don't think it's
I
changed.
will
And
say my son is in 8th grade, and they are learning about things in a different way at his school. And they use a lot of original source material, which I really appreciate. They're looking at it from the point of view of different participants, but there isn't a textbook that's doing that. That just happens to be because he has 2 really good civics and history teachers.
well, it's funny you say that because my younger son is 25, and when he was in 8th grade, 7th and 8th grade, his history teacher said, we're not going to use the textbook. If I do, I will only get up to World War II. And they will never get to Vietnam.
Right.
They will
These
never
important
get to everything
parts.
else because everything else is so heavily written.
That's
and
right.
what they need to know about those times. Whereas really what happened in the Crusades is not going to be as impactful as what's happened
what
in the
happened.
last 2
Exactly.
decades.
That we
And
need to know about.
To sit there and be teaching them that, they're never going to understand Iran and Afghanistan. They're never going to get to that point if we
That's
stay on
really true.
point in the textbook because there's so much written that the teachers even know at that point. And it was
very
enlightening
true.
for him. So I have to ask, what are you working on now?
Well, I have 2 books coming out next year.
2 books?
2.
What, you're not
One-
sleeping?
No, I don't. One in January and
Okay.
one in June.
Wow.
The book in January is called The Mystery of Mrs. Christie, and it's the story of a woman you think you know well, probably Agatha Christie, most successful novelist, most prolific, and most certainly a creator of a key genre. But she herself disappeared in circumstances that are very much like one of her own books. When she was a younger woman in her 30s, right after she finished her 3rd book. She disappeared for 11 days. It launched the largest manhunt in England's history.
Wow.
And then she just as mysteriously reappeared on the 11th day. And as words, the mystery's never been solved. And as we learn what happened to her during those 11 days, we're also learning her origin story, much like my other books, in which we kind of examine how she became this most powerful woman and really key writer. And then I have a book coming out in June called The Personal Librarian, and it's the story of J.P. Morgan's, the famous financier. He created the Morgan Library in the early 1900s here in New York, and he hired a woman, Bella DaCosta Green, to be its librarian and curator. She became, during her lifetime, the most powerful person in the art world. And she was only able to do so because she hid her true identity. She was actually African American, and she passed as white.
Wow.
And of course, this was the age of beginning of segregation. And her father was one of the most powerful voices in support of equality after the Civil War. He was the first African American graduate from Harvard, dean of Howard Law School, and proponent of the Civil Rights Act of 1875, which, if it had not been overturned in the 1890s, we would have never had segregation. But because his effort and others failed, his daughter lived in a world of segregation, and so she had to pretend to be white to succeed.
Wow.
Yeah.
2 in 1 year? 2
Crazy.
very
and I
different
forgot to
books?
mention, that's a co-written book with a wonderful co-writer,
Okay.
Victoria Christopher Murray, and that's the only way I was able to do 2 books.
I
in
was
1
going to
year.
say, there had to
gosh.
be.
Yeah.
And what was it like co-writing? Well, I'll get you back to talk about that, but what was it like co-writing?
Wonderful. I mean,
Right.
my co-writer, Victoria, and we just synced from just the first day. I mean, she does not write history. She writes contemporary fiction. So we really brought really complementary strengths to the project. I came with my background in history. She's a wonderful developer of character. And it was really a magical experience. It really was.
Wow.
Yeah, it was. A
After
gift.
years of writing solo.
Yeah, I loved it. It would never, we each informed the others. Our conversations and the way we kind of went back and forth in terms of sharing the process was very, very special.
So January and June.
Yeah.
You'll be on the road a lot.
Oh, I know.
Book festivals are my name.
And I feel like I've been on the road for 3
I
years.
know,
You've
you
seen me
have.
everywhere,
You
so.
have. We have so much fun. We were in Morristown. We were in Tucson last
I
year.
know, Tucson
We had a really great
too.
time.
We've been a lot of
But
places
it's fun
together.
because when you go to those festivals, you can see large groups of authors together,
Yeah.
and you can see the pairings and see who appears on panels together. And I know that I interviewed you with Whitney Sharon.
Yeah.
When
It
we
was
just sat there
wonderful.
and had these great conversations,
Conversations.
but a different conversation would take place if there were different authors on the panel.
Exactly.
It would take the thing in a conversation in a different direction.
Which is wonderful. And you did a great job in helping those pairings happen.
The machinations of putting people together.
I know, it was really great. It really was.
I am so glad we finally figured out how to get you here today.
Thank you so much for
It's so
having
great.
me. to
It was so
offices.
great.
It was great treat. And I know we'll be seeing each other a lot. In the
I
years to come.
can't wait to hear more about the other books. I feel like I need to go read the whole Agatha Christie history in order to sit there and just see what's going to
It's
happen.
fascinating.
Is next year an anniversary year for her or anything, or no?
I don't think so.
I don't
but
think
that's
so
a
either.
great question.
Yeah, something to definitely take a look at.
Yeah, I don't think it is, but she's perennial.
She's perennial, is right.
You know, she
Exactly.
really is.
Somebody's still down the rabbit hole into mysteries. Who do you start with? You know,
Right.
good way in.
Yeah, definitely. She was really an incredible person.
Thank you for joining
Thank
us
you.
today.
I appreciate it. Thank
Everyone,
you.
thank you. And till next time, Book Reporter Talks to.